Várjál, készültem a mai nap egyébként, csak mondom, készültem, jó? Ez a szék közveszélyes, ahogy a tiétek is. Veszélyes. Megtudom így, hogy miért. Szóval, röviden annyi, hogy a gamer széketek felrobbanhat. Igen. Felrobbanhat a széketek. Nem hisztek nekem, ugye? Na geci. Olyat láttam TikTokon, muszáj mutatnom. Jó, kussolj Kína, oké? Itt vannak a legtöbben. Figyelj, Pali bemutat 3 különböző széket, ledobnak rá súlyt, figyeld meg geci, mi történik. Az elsőnél semmi. Ez egy jó minőségű, hát jobb minőségű, nem spórolták le rajta az anyagokat, irodai szék. Ez az első. Figyelj, jó, dumál, meg pofázik. Jó, második szék. Pukkant egyet a nyomásra. Na de állj meg! Most jön a legrosszabb! Most jön a legrosszabb. Figyelj! Azt figyeld! Felrobban, bazd meg! Felrobban! Kigyulladt a kurva szék! A súlytól! Nem kamu, elmondanám. Azokban a székekben, ami egy fos, tehát konkrétan egy kínai retek, amiben nem nitrogént töltöttek, ebben a szarban, amiben állítod a magasságot, hanem oxigént, felrobbanhat. Ténylegesen. Amiben oxigént töltöttek, hogy lespórolják ebben az egészben a pumpát, felrobbanhat a szék. Nemrég volt egy olyan hír, hogy meghalt egy 14 éves gyerek a gamer székbe. Vagy nem gamer székbe, szarminőségű székbe, bocsánat. Szarminőségű székbe. De egyébként itt a komment szekcióban egyébként így írják, én is próbáltam magamat nyugtatni, hogy egyébként, ezt mondom, csak abban az esetben van, hogyha a leges legszarabb ótvar minőségű széket megveszed, akárhonnan. Egyébként nem tudom, mit mond, bazd meg, nem értem. Hiába hiszed, hogy értem. Na mindegy, van erről több videó. Na várjál.
You've come home from work or school and you just want to sit
Bing
down.
chilling.
You slip off your shoes at the front door, drop your bag off on the couch, and stroll over to your desk. There's a new YouTube video that dropped today from your favorite creator, and you're excited to watch it. You roll your chair over to the desk and plop down on the seat. In an instant, you're thrown across the room. When you finally come to, all you can remember is a loud bang rocketing through your bedroom. You drag your hands across your body to see if you're okay when you feel a hot stickiness. You close your eyes, hoping it won't be what you think it is. But when you bring your hands up in front of you to look, their crimson sheen betrays your injury. Next thing you know, you're in the emergency room, and surgeons are busy pulling chips, shards, and metal scrap from your abdomen. How could sitting in an office chair go so very, very wrong? What makes an office chair go boom?
Szóval mai nap erre fogunk választ találni, hogy ez mégis hogy lehetséges. Mert én még nem láttam a videót, esküszöm, viszont kurvára érdekel a téma. Hogy én tegnap este ennek a hírét így megtudtam, hogy létezik egy ilyen dolog, csak tudni akarom, hogy mi által. És ez egy létező dolog, hogy kvázi felrobbanhat a kibaszott széked nyomástól. Vágod? De mondom, elvileg ennek kevés az esélye, szóval most meg kell engem nyugtatni ebben a videóban, aztán visszatérünk akármi másra.
Today's episode is sponsored by Leo returned to his
2013-ban történt az eset. Nemrég volt egy olyan hír, hogy meghalt egy 14 éves gyerek.
Apartments he shared with his older sister. After a long day at school, he laid back on his bed to rest while his sister, Miss Leo, who had just gotten out of the shower, sat down at her desk to twiddle around on the internet while blow-drying her hair. Then, with no warning, a sharp bang ripped through the room, and a powerful surge of air followed, throwing the room into disarray. In the aftermath, Mr. Leo, still reeling from the sudden pressure change, looked around their ransacked room to see his sister laying still on the floor, her body thrown like a dead thing against the side of their bed. She was still conscious, but just barely, and passed out moments later. With his sister's blood pooling on the floor around him, Mr. Leo called the paramedics, and shortly after, she was hoisted into an ambulance, speeding off to the emergency room. Medical teams got to work on her double time and told her family that she'd been injured by an explosion. Her anus had been split open, punctured by fragments of metal, and her genitals had likewise been perforated by shrapnel and debris. Miss Leo was wheeled into surgery not long after getting to the hospital, where surgeons and nurses worked to remove the detritus that had been rocketed into her nether regions. After a grueling 5 hours, doctors finally stitched up her wounds. But her journey wasn't done yet. It would take yet another 6 months for her injuries to fully heal.
Na, ennek az emberek biztos, hogy fóbiái lehet innentől a gamerszék, vagy nem gamerszék, az irodai székektől, nem gamerszék.
Looking back at the scene in the siblings' tiny apartment, it was clear where the explosion had originated. The small, blue, rotating, gas spring-operated stool was to blame. The force of the explosion split the foam seat into 4 discrete pieces, and the wooden mount showed a nasty hole where a metal rod had rocketed up through it into...
Az végig belement! Bazd meg! Te szerinted, várjál? Tehát, hogy... Reggel óta ezen ülök! Szerinted tudni akarom a választ erre a kérdésre.
Miss Leo. Inside the room, the siblings' computer.
Geci, este megláttam ezt a TikTok videót, reggel felültem, és az volt az első gondolat, hogy ki kell cserélnem a széket. Addig, amíg erre nem találok választ, hogy ez mégis miért van, addig én így ülök.
Had been bombed out.
De legalább hoztam témát a stream elejére, szóval nézzük.
By the shockwave, and parts of the plastic casing had melted. Lucky for his sister, the steel rod in the center of the stool didn't pierce into her body.
Ja, hogy az nem fordult a testébe.
Her injuries would have been much, much worse. After interviewing neighbors, journalists found that the sound of the blast could be heard from as far away as 200 meters. Some thought it was so loud it had to be a gas pipe explosion and called the fire department. But how could a simple stool explode like that?
Széklet.
And should I be worried about my rotund tushy in my office chair? The first step to figuring out the truth behind this phenomenon is to learn how office chairs work generally.
Not.
Basically, chairs are medium-sized objects that support our weight that we can use to... So my producers tell me that I don't need to explain to you how chairs work. But office chairs do have one little mechanism that, quite literally, raises the bar. It's called a gas spring.
Na igen, ez a
technology
lényeg.
that lets these chairs adjust their height.
Igen.
It's similar to a bike pump in that it has a metal cylinder with an airtight piston mounted on a rod inside. In a pump, the piston is attached to a handle that you pump up and down. The piston moves inside the cylinder, sucking in air before compressing it through a valve and into whatever you're inflating. Your tires, your sports balls, and whatnot. In a gas spring, the piston is attached to the bottom of your seat, and the entire cylinder is pressurized with nitrogen gas and oil. The nitrogen is pressurized so it exerts upward force on the piston, which holds your seat at the topmost position. The nitrogen provides the force, and the oil lubricates, ensuring the chair works smoothly. Also, since gas springs are holding pressurized gas, they have to be made of metal that can handle the force. Gas springs occasionally have holes in the piston that allow gas to move from one side of the piston to the other. This might...
Ki az az állat, aki egyébként a két méret között állítja magának a széket? Vagy a legkisebb, vagy a legmagasabb, nem? Szerintem. Van olyan közületek, aki a felénél használja a széket? Ilyen ember nem létezik egyébként.
So conceptually, the gas springs in our office chairs are meant to contain pressurized gases which, if released in an uncontrolled manner, would violently explode. But our chairs are built specifically to contain that pressure and control it. 2009. A 14-year-old teenager
Jó, hogy ez ráadásul 2009-ben volt.
Only Xiao Gong, to protect his identity, was injured by an exploding office chair while home alone. The boy went to his computer to go on the internet like so many young folks, when the chair below him erupted, driving a steel rod into his abdomen. As his blood pooled on the floor around him, he dragged himself to a phone and called his father, who contacted medical authorities. When they finally arrived, Xiao Gong was looking very pale from blood loss, but was still conscious enough to speak. Xiao Gong was taken to the Jiaozhou City Center Hospital, where doctors worked to save the boy's life. He was bleeding internally, hemorrhaging blood after the rod that had been embedded inside him had damaged blood vessels around his wounds. Tragically, doctors weren't able to get a handle on the boy's blood loss, and within an hour of arriving at the hospital, he had passed away.
Shit.
His father said after that he never thought that a child just sitting on a chair could have any type of accident, and that this type of pressurized cartridge going out of control is definitely a quality issue. Another case from November 2007 out of Yantai City describes how a 68-year-old man was taken to the hospital after his rotating chair exploded. He was taken to the hospital in shock and similarly suffering from blood loss like Xiaogang. He had serious rectal injuries, including a rupture in his small intestine. Some of the damaged tissue had tears as wide as 5 centimeters. By the time his surgery was over, medical teams pulled more than 20 fragments of metal from his body, as well as chunks of wood and foam. Not only that, but the steel rod from the gas spring had been driven into him as well, and had to be removed. Horrifyingly, a doctor present said that the rod had been shot into the man from the blunt side, and the explosion had to be powerful enough to sever it from the mechanism entirely. Basically, the explosion had to be giant. The phenomenon of office chair explosions seems to be certainly real, but why do all these stories seem to come from China?
Igen. Ez lesz a legnagyobb kérdés. Miért csak Kínában történik ez? Na, várj, egyébként lehet, hogy nem kell félni annyira. Lehet, még visszaülök a székembe. Ki tudja?
In the report on Miss Liu and her brother, we learn that when office chair components are assembled in Guangdong, then imported to Xiamen for packaging and assembly, the chairs are trademarked with company contract details which guarantee standard safety requirements and priced accordingly around $40 to $50. However, when modules like springs and metal rods are imported to Xiamen instead of purchased from a supplier and then constructed, the same safety standards can be avoided and the price lowered to something in the ballpark of only $20 US. Basically, a chair company can buy already constructed gas springs from a factory for a higher price, or they can buy the parts to make the gas springs, build it themselves, and save a buck. The problem is, they're not held to the same standards as the factory that sells the springs wholesale. The question remains though, what is behind this string of office chair explosions?
Lényeg!
Seeking Truth, a Mythbusters-style television show from China,
Ezt mutattam az elején.
bought from what the hosts call the third market in China. Basically the black market, out of the eye of the government. The black market chair handled the weight the worst. When the sandbag hit the seat, not only did the chair explode, but it erupted into flames, setting the whole chair alight. It's nice to see that when these chairs are built properly, they can withstand a certain amount of force. But we still don't know why.
Hát nem tudom én, ahogy az utóbbi 3 napban konkrétan streamekben így ugrálok a székemen, mondjuk kicsit be vagyok szarva ettől.
Chinese Academy of Science Mechanics Research Institute, who told the host that there are 2 main reasons why these chairs can explode. The first reason we witnessed in the experiment with the second-hand chair. He tells us that if the gas spring has a crack or some other damage, it can no longer contain the pressures required to operate, and when the weight is dropped on the seat, that pressure escapes violently, aka an explosion. It's like sitting on a blown-up balloon. There's a pressure inside, and as you add weight to it, those pressures increase until the latex of the balloon can no longer hold it back. If you jump on top of a balloon, it'll pop even harder. The second reason explains the fiery explosion of the third chair. Liang tells Seeking Truth that many under-the-table products use cheaper gases like regular air instead of non-flammable gases.
Na, igen, erről beszéltem, hogy azok voltak a kommentekben leginkább így a dolgok, hogy bent így az érvek, hogy ezek a szar minőségű dolgok, amik ugye ezekben a székekben használnak, azok nem nitrogének, vagy nem nitrogén, hanem egyszerű oxigén, amivel ugye tudod szabályozni ennek a magasságát, vagy a szabályozását. Igen. Mit nevetsz ki? Ez egy valós jelenség, bassza meg!
Air isn't flammable, which you'd be mostly right.
Na várja, amúgy igen.
However, on a chemical level, oxygen is one of the core ingredients of fire. Combustion is defined as the combination of oxygen with another substance that generates heat and light. On a similar note, the higher the pressure, the faster and hotter a fire will burn. However, if the manufacturer puts an even more flammable gas into their spring than regular air, you can see much larger reactions. On top of that, When pressures rise, so too does temperature. This by raising and lowering a chair seat for 20 minutes, and then taking the temperature of the gas spring.
20 percre megemelte és leengedte a székülését. 20 percen keresztül. Hát az kurva sok, hát életemben nem szabályoztam annyit ezt a széket, azt már megvan 3 éve.
Probably because the chair they used was the most expensive they could find, and likely used the proper nitrogen in the spring. In short, all office chairs use gas springs which contain pressurized gas, which, if the casing is damaged, can violently depressurize, triggering an explosion. Not just that, but if the manufacturer uses oxygen in the spring itself, then that compressed gas can also combust, adding fire to an otherwise already terrible situation. Office chairs aren't the only appliances around our home that use pressure for our needs.
Több dolgot ki kell basznom a lakásból.
At this very moment, you may be relying on hot water under pressure in a water heater for showering and washing your dishes and clothes. You might have also seen automatic door closers in schools and public buildings that use pressure to shut themselves. But much like office chairs, when the mechanics are damaged, they can fail to catastrophic effect. Office chairs use the power of pressure to make it easier for us to get comfortable. But when the mechanism that we use to contain the power is damaged, or made incorrectly, then disaster can follow. So yes, there have been incidents of office chair explosions. But most of us aren't even going to be able to buy a chair of such low quality.
Jó, oké. Na, visszajöhetek a székembe. Szóval nem tudunk ilyen szar minőségűt venni.
That this is an issue. Like Seeking Truth told us, the chair that failed most horrifically had no safety standards whatsoever, and no manufacturer label to hold them accountable. As long as we buy office chairs from reliable suppliers and other major retailers, then we'll be perfectly fine. If you want to check any chairs that you have around you, you can find a label, usually under the seat, that identifies that it is up to the regulatory standards in your country.
Csak annyit ír, hogy front. Tehát akkor frontinos a székem? Okon van félni! Nem bírom. Hallod, ez vagy kétszer nehezebb ez a szék, mint te. Azt hozzá kell tenni, hogy az én székemnél... ezt most hogy mutassam nektek? Az én székemnél nem közvetlen a... ezt hogy mondjam neked? Várjál, paint. Ugye, hogy így van az ülés, ez az ülés. Ülés, tudod? Ahova teszem a seggem. Na, ugye nem egyből itt van ez a szar, ez a rugó, tehát nem egyből itt van ez a rugó, hanem tartja a fém, és itt van a rugó. Szóval, amikor nyomást helyezek a székre, akkor erre helyezi a nyomást, és nem erre. Érted? Szóval, ja, ez amúgy nem annyira rossz. Megemeljem a széket? Nem tudom, szerintem. Kurva nehéz, várjál. Várjál! Ez most baj. Jó, oké. Azért még visszaülök a simára, jó? Szerintem kicsit beszartam. Nem, csak vicc.
If the label isn't there, and you weren't the one to remove it, it could be a sign your chair.
Szóval a lényeg, hogy nálam nincs ilyen írás. Egyébként nekem az SPC-s szék, az baj, hogy az SPC-ből simán kinézem, hogy ők megvették a kínai szartól, amit saját maguknak forgalmaznak, szóval nézzétek meg a széketek alját.
Isn't up to code. If you've been using a chair for more than 3 years, double check the mechanism to make sure there isn't wear and tear, and consider getting a new one if you have the money. It should also be said that office chairs have weight limits, and exceeding that limit can lead to disaster.
Oké. Hát az enyémnek azt hiszem valami 120 kg a terbírása. Várjál. Ingyen volt amúgy, szóval ne higgyétek, hogy én veszek ilyen drága székeket. 120 kg! Ó, bazd meg! Még 5 kilót bír akkor a szék. A kurva... Nem. Rendben. Egyébként ez egy jó minőségű szék, tehát hogyha megnézed az oldalát egyébként, akkor itt látod, hogy ugye oldalt ugye nem egyből a rugó helyezkedik el, hanem ugye van ez a tartó szarja. Érted a lényeget? Tehát, hogy a rugó rész az csak itt helyezkedik el. Itt viszont meg tartja elég faszán a dolgokat. Minimális magasságot soha. Mi volt minimális magassága ennek a szarnak? 170 centi a minimális magasság? What the fuck? 172 vagyok. Oké. Épp hogy elérem, oké. Legalább hoztam egy érdekes témát streamre.
Don't exceed the weight limit. As a chair ages, the weight that your chair can handle will be reduced. In the end, if you just check your office chair for damage and replace them when you can, then you can make sure you'll always chair well. It's over.
Aha, szóval kevés az esély erre, hogy ez megtörténjen. Oké. Hát megmentette az életemet, amiért nem lesz szék fóbiám. Amúgy ez egy jó videó volt, meg engem érdekelt, mert mondom, hogy láttam TikTokon ezt a szitut. De egyébként ez egy érdekes videó volt. Egy jó téma is szerintem. Ha esetleg felrobbannék a székembe, akkor nem tudom. Akkor legalább streambe történjen.